Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this very first talk of our series of talks on algorithms and competitive programming. This series of talks has been organized by the competitive programming community here in the Facultad de Matemáticas of the University of Yucatan. And today I'm very glad to introduce Elías Madera. Elías is a programmer, and he has participated in the Olympiad of Informatics in 2019 and 2020, both in the Yucatan State phase and also representing the Yucatan State in the national competitions here in Mexico. He is currently a fourth semester student of software engineering here at the University of Yucatan. And this summer, he will be a software engineer intern at Uber in California. And today, he will share with us a talk on competitive programming to succeed in big tech interviews. So thank you, Elías, for your time in the presentation. And please go ahead.
Of course, Victor. Thank you so much for the invite to be here today, and thank you for what you're doing with the community as well. I know it's been a lot of work behind it, so I'm very happy, very excited, and also very glad to be part of this. So thank you for that. And yeah, so let me tell you guys a little bit about me. I am Elías Madera de Regil. I'm a sophomore student here studying software engineering. And I was a competitive programmer for a few years. I'm not competing anymore since I've been a little bit busy with a few programs that I've been a part of with Uber. And I will be joining them next summer for an internship. And everything that I have achieved, I think, has grown from the fact that I've been competing, and I competed for quite some time now. And I want to share what I've learned about competitive programming, and I want to share what I've learned about using those techniques that you learn to succeed in such complicated interviews that many people struggle with sometimes, and also to give you a little bit of insight on what you can expect during an interview, since I am guessing many of you haven't had one or may have not have one before. Like I did when I first interviewed with Uber, and it can be a little bit stressful. So I'm here to hopefully share what I've learned and connect with some people. So feel free to do that as well. So we can start with a little bit about my competitive programming background. I used to compete from 2018 to 2021, mainly on the national and the state level Olympiads here in Mexico and here in Yucatan. And like Victor said, I was selected to represent the state in the national competition. I was competing to get an entry into the International Olympiad of Informatics in the IOI. So it was a very exciting phase and time for me. But the funniest thing is that I didn't know programming before high school. This was everything during high school, and I remember taking my first programming classes on Saturdays at 10 a.m. and wondering why did I choose to study programming Saturdays at 10 a.m. when I could be sleeping. And I would have never thought how far those classes took me, how far competitive programming would have taken my career, and how many skills that it has taught me I've been able to use in the real world. So I'm very glad I did take those Saturday classes. But I didn't start from very young, as many people do in competitive programming. Many start way younger than me. So it's never too late. It's never too late to get into programming, it's never too late to get into competitive programming. So some of the most recent stuff that I've been doing regarding competitive programming is particularly the image at the right that you can see is from an Olympiad that was a state level Olympiad here in Yucatan. and I got first place on that Olympiad, which was organized by a very big private school here in the state called Unimayap, and they offer programming courses and so on. And I got a scholarship from them because of the Olympiad. So, and on the left you can see that I participated in an international tournament, I guess competition, alongside a few friends, and we got 247th place out of like 2,000 participants. So I'm very happy with our performance. Definitely could have done better, but it's always fun to compete. And with this, I just want to show that competitive programming is an international thing. It's something that's very current and something that a lot of people get involved with. A lot of companies, a lot of organizations um, are working around competitive programming events, competitions, sites, online contests. There's a ton of stuff regarding competitive programming. So rest assured that if you decide to get into competitive programming, you'll definitely find something to apply it on. Now, before we get into like the technical stuff, I just want to mention that I'm not sure if we have anyone from Wadi, from the University of Yucatan here. But in any case, if your first language or your mother tongue is not English and you sometimes feel like you can be a little bit rusty in the English language, please practice it. Please make sure you have strong English communication skills, since that's the number one rule if you want to work at a big tech, if you want to get an internship at a big tech or at an American company. You will need to learn English, and not just American companies, but companies from all over the world use English as a standard language. All the newest articles, everything's on English as well. So if you ask me, there's no excuse to not know English anymore. You can hop in your cell phone and use Duolingo to learn while you're doing stuff. So yeah, if you feel like your vocabulary might be a little bit rusty, or you struggle sometimes with listening to people speak in English, I do encourage you a lot to practice it and to start learning if you can. So that's it. The rest of the presentation is gonna be in English, so enjoy. Let's start with how what was the first thing that I noticed helped me, competitive programming helped me with. So on October 2021, I started applying for a lot of programs. I wanted to make good use of my competitive programming skills during high school. I knew I had a head start compared to my fellow students and colleagues. So I started applying to a bunch of programs thinking it would be very easy to get an internship. Turns out it's not. Turns out it's very hard. It's a very competitive space. There's a lot of demand, a lot of software engineering students out there. And turns out it's pretty hard as an international student to get an internship at an American company, especially being a freshman or a sophomore. So I want to share how I've managed to do this. I did get into the Uber Career Prep program, which is a career program from Uber where they bring transparency and visibility to the steps necessary to continue a successful STEM career to traditionally underrepresented cultures. So I think that that was a big part of my success and my ability to land an internship, definitely. So I want to thank them as well. But I think that was the first part, how competitive programming helped me, because for this program you do have to interview and you do have a technical interview, and we will talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And then following the timeline, on June 2022, I had my conversion interviews for the internship on 2023, on summer 2023, with Uber. And I want to just very quickly explain, maybe some of you don't know the concept of big tech. And big tech just means, or just refers to the very big, massive companies, especially American companies, but not necessarily, that actually the term comes from big data. So it's pretty much all those massive companies who have a lot of power in the industry they are in, and also have a lot of software engineering jobs and are very tech related. So They're usually they're usually like a standard for the interviews. So basically, if you know how to pass a big tech interview, you're pretty much set for any interview. And I just wanted to share this diagram of my GitHub commits during my practice of the summer internship conversion interviews. And as you can see, I started practicing a little bit back, like April, May, not very consistently. But during the last 3 months, up until like my interview, I started practicing every day, at least 2 or 3 problems a day, solving problems, practicing, watching videos. So I just want to share that it is definitely something you have to practice a lot, but I will get into how you can do this and how competitive programming helped me practice. But they're definitely very competitive and a little bit tough, but I feel like with the right resources, you will have no problem with them. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these notorious coding interviews that you will get asked pretty much at any software engineering internship or position or full-time position interview. So what are the coding interviews? The coding interviews are very similar to competitive programming problems, since they ask you to solve a coding problem in an efficient way. Now, I say similar because it's different in a lot of ways. And I think that the main way that they are different is that they are definitely a little bit easier than competitive programming problems. Myself competing in national level and international level competitions, I can say that it's definitely a step below that. But it's because they measure different skills and they are looking for different skills. When you do competitive programming, you are the only one looking at your code. You're the only one that's ever gonna see that code again, and it's a code that it doesn't matter if it's not easy to maintain in the long run. It's not necessary. So when you do competitive programming, you're often worrying more about efficiency, memory allocation, and just in general coding speed, coding like how fast you can code, because that's always helpful in the competitions to get the lowest time. And they definitely value some stuff in the interviews, but not everything. So they do look after different skills, since there are such big companies that they need to know that the programmers are gonna produce good code that future programmers or software engineers are gonna be able to see and read and say, hey, I do understand what's going on here. I know how to solve this problem, or I know how to implement this new solution. So they need people who have very strong, good practices in coding, and we'll see a little bit more about that in a bit. So if they're looking for people to solve good competitive programming problems, and as well have very good practices, why do they value competitive programmers, or do they even value competitive programmers? Like, do people at the interviews, they say, oh, you're a competitive programmer? Does that change maybe how they look at you? The answer is yes. They do value it, and they do value it a lot. And some people may argue that they actually value it too much, and that's a very interesting point. Competitive programming is always about efficiency and speed, and you may be able to tell that a lot. That is some very good qualities to have in an engineer. If you can produce very efficient code and produce it fast, you're going to be valuable to any company. Now, as I said, it's not the only thing. So the people that argue that competitive programmers are valued too much often say that a competitive programmer will produce code that's not easy to maintain, and that might be true. So that's why developing these other skills that they look for is very important to complement what you already know as a competitive programmer. You don't just want to be writing code that's unreadable and that's maybe has a lot of things that you will not understand later, and we'll have an example about that. But you want to be a part of a team. You want to be there and write good code. So they definitely value it a lot. And if you mention someone during an interview, yeah, I used to be a competitive programmer, they will say, oh, then this question is gonna be easy for you, because they understand that competitive programmers often solve very hard, harder questions than they're gonna ask in an interview. So competitive programming is definitely has a high return of investment, I would say, ROI, since you'll definitely get a lot of knowledge translated into interviews and technical rounds for companies up to a certain point. And with that, I mean that for example, competed for a few years, and I stopped competing. And even though competing is not, or yeah, it wasn't for me, um, I still applied 99% of the stuff that I learned in the interviews. Now, if I kept competing and doing these Olympiads and such, I would probably have become a much better competitive programmer. But up to a certain point, you're gonna start learning algorithms and theorems and theory that you're probably not gonna apply in your job or at the interviews, since it's a whole nother level of math, a lot of math theory involved in competitive programming, which is not necessarily something you do every day as a software engineer. You do engineering. So I would say that it's definitely a very good way to spend your time, because you're able to translate that into a career skills up to a certain point. And as I said, it's a very good way to stand up from the rest. If your resume contains like participating in the ICPC or participating in Olympiads and being a competitive programmer, you're definitely going to stand out from the rest. So it's always a good thing to have those competitions under your belt. Oh yeah, so what I was talking about writing code that you will never see and you will never see again, and you don't care if it's unreadable. Well, I brought you a very good example of that. Here it's a snippet of a code that I wrote for a problem, a competitive programming problem. Now, I chose it because I just picked a random one from my computer, and looking at it, I cannot tell what it does. I have no idea what it does, and I will probably never do, since there's terrible practices, programming practices in that code. There's no comments. Everything's it's not structured. It's not there's no abstractions being made, and my variable names are horrible. But I didn't care at that time, because I was competing. I was solving something, and I wanted to solve it fast. Now, to contrast, I brought here a code from my actual code of a question of my conversion interviews. And well, as you can see, I could still do better with a little bit more comments, but you usually just talk over it with your interviewer. We'll talk about that in a bit. But as you can see, it's much more readable. My variables have actual names that I can read, that I can understand what it is doing. So you can see a little bit the difference of, I'm not gonna see this code ever again, so I don't care, I'm gonna do it however it comes out, versus, hey, I will need to know that you're gonna work in a team and you're gonna be able to produce good code that we will be able to maintain in the long run. So you can see a little bit the difference about that. Now, coding is not everything, and this is a very important thing to remember when you're interviewing at a big tech or at any company, especially like any company related to tech is gonna care more about everything else than coding, and there's a reason. So imagine you have a candidate that's very good with the technical skills. He's very good at coding. He's proficient in C++. He's proficient in Python, in Java, in a ton of languages, and he's very good. but you cannot work with him as a team. He does not communicate. He does not explain his solutions. He does not explain why he chose those solutions. You will not be able to work with him in a team, and the team is not going to be able to work with him. Compared to someone who has very strong communication skills, has good practices coding. I don't know, maybe he's not super proficient in every single language, but because he's passionate, he's curious, he has a good mentality. You know that if tomorrow we go from Python to Golang, or from Golang to whatever new language comes out, he is gonna be able to learn it fast, and he's gonna want to learn and change and adapt. And that's the thing. You can always teach someone technical skills. You can always take a course. You can always practice. You can always do exercises. But it's much tougher to teach or to train someone soft skills. So soft skills are super important in the coding interviews. Like I said, even more important than the code, because the code, it's something that you should always be able to do. So basically, the technical part is something that they do not even like. It's like the baseline. So what's gonna make you stand up from the rest is gonna be your soft skills. That's what's gonna decide if you pass the interviews or not. Since the coding is the same for everyone, what's the only thing that changes? How you approach it, how you go about it, how you talk with your interviewer. That's what's gonna change. The solution is gonna be the same across all. It's probably gonna be the same across all the interviewees. So that's what's gonna make you stand up. That's what's gonna make you pass the interview. And what do I mean with soft skills? In particularly, I mean communication skills. So how well you communicate with your interviewer. How well do you ask clarifying questions, which we're gonna talk more about that. How often do you talk about your solution, what you're thinking about, what's your approach to solve this problem, and problem solving techniques. So basically the same, how you approach the problem, how you decide to tackle, maybe, oh, I'm gonna try to fix and solve this, and then I will solve this other thing, and then I'll merge them together and stuff like that. How the best practices that you have. So if you solve the problem, but if you solve it using best practices for coding, if you write clean code, if it's readable, if your variable names are descriptive, if your function names are descriptive, if you use classes, that kind of stuff. But also they're measuring your behavioral and your, I guess, mentality. So if you're a curious person, if you ask questions, if you're passionate about the company, if you're passionate about software engineering, if you're passionate about the culture there, if you want to learn, that's always a good thing. And I think if I could tell you one thing to take from this talk, is to always be curious, to always be passionate. And the reason is that passion shows. Passion shows because you will want to learn, you will want to ask, you will want to be happy, yeah, you're going to be excited about being there. And you should, because every interview, regardless of the outcome, is a very good opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity for you to sit one-on-one with an engineer and ask as many questions as you want. It's a very good way of learning. It's a very good way to get an insight into the industry, regardless of the outcome. So always make good use of your interviews. Don't think, oh, I will not pass the interview with Google, so I'm just not gonna be there. Don't do that. It's not your job to disqualify yourself. So just go for it and try your best. Be excited, show passion, be curious, with a big smile, and always try and do your best and learn something. Learn something from the interview. You will definitely always learn something new. Okay, so I want to do something a little bit more dynamic. So what I want to do is, Victor, if you could help me with this here. Do you think you could be the interviewer and ask me a few questions, and I'll act as the interviewee, so we can maybe do a little bit of a role play?
Yes, of course.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's work with this question, and I will show a very a bad example about how to go about with this, and then we'll show a good example. Let's see if you can catch on what happens.
Okay, great. So Okay, Elias, I would like you to write a function that will return the largest element in a list. So,
Okay, I see. Yeah. Mm, yeah. I would. Uh, I would do this. This would be my solution. That's it.
okay, that was very quick for you. I have a couple of questions. Like first, what happens if that array is empty?
If if the array is empty, I believe that. Yeah, I think. Mm, yeah, I think we can add a condition to ask if the array is empty, and if it is, then we can just return none.
Oh, okay, okay. And another question: how do you know that that array can be loaded in your memory? Did you verify
Um,
that, or how would you do that?
I I didn't think about that, to be honest. I thought that it was gonna be always available in memory. So I do not know how the max function reacts to that, but it should have an inbuilt function to return something in that case. But I'm not sure what it is.
Okay, but I don't know. Should I continue with questions, Elias?
Sure, let's do one more.
Okay, and okay, and how does this function will work if I send you an array of characters or numbers? Do you think it will work in the same way?
Um, Now that you mention it, I did not think about that either. I think that I think yeah, I think that Max should cover that as well. Maybe convert the characters to integers, but I'm not sure. Okay, thank you, Victor. So
You have some technical problems there with your code, definitely.
yes, as you can see, Elias did not do a very good job at his interview. It was definitely um, I think it was great, the role play. I hope you were able to see maybe what was wrong with it. Um, Also, please, if you have any questions or any comments, feel free to leave them right now in the chat. And if not, you feel free to ask something at the end as well. Um, so yeah, as you can see, I did not ask for any clarifying questions. I did not handle any cases, any edge cases. I didn't even think about edge cases, and I didn't communicate my solution with my interviewer, which are all terrible things to do. So let's see how a better example could go about. You can start, Victor.
Okay, so I asked you for a code function that will receive an array and return the max element of that array. Right?
Okay. Okay, that sounds
yeah.
good. So I want to return, just to make sure, I want to return the largest element in an array that you will give me.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And will the array fit in memory, or do I have to worry about that?
Yes. At this point, you can consider that your memory can handle that array.
Okay, great. And are they all numbers, or are there any mixed types in the array?
Yes, for this case, we can consider that you will be handling only integers.
Okay, that's great. And so I just want to return the element, not the index, right? Just the value of the element.
Exactly. We just want to know what is the maximum number in that array, not the index.
Okay, great. Can the list be empty?
Yes, that is a possibility. You need to consider that.
Okay. We'll add a conditional to ask if the list is empty, and then if it's empty, what should we return? Is none fine, or should we return a fallback value?
You can return just a message saying the array is empty.
Okay. And great. Can I use inbuilt libraries, or would I need to write my own max function?
No, you can use built-in libraries, but just make sure that you know what this library is really doing behind.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah. So what I will do is I think my approach is gonna be oh, one more question: is the array sorted?
No, it's not sorted.
Okay.
Or maybe you can think of that. We don't know actually. Could
Okay.
be, could not be.
Okay, so if we cannot guarantee that the array is sorted, I think that my approach will be to iterate through every element of the array and keep a maximum so far variable where we could store a variable that maybe is holding the maximum value we've seen yet, and then at the end we'll have, after iterating through the whole array, we'll have the actual value. Now, if the array, or if the function were to be called on the same input many times, I think that our approach could be sorting the array and then storing and just retrieving the last answer and storing that answer for that input. And I think that would be faster in case the same function is called multiple times on the same input. So I think that would be my approach. But for now, I think we can do the max one. So it will look something like this.
Good. Okay. So that's great that you consider that this function can be called inside another loop. So I think you're doing a good job with this code.
Thank you. Okay. That went well, didn't it?
You have the job.
Great, I got the internship. All right. So yeah, guys. I hope this very short roleplay was of help. As you can see, ask as many questions, clarifying questions as you can, and always try to communicate your thought process. Never assume anything. The questions are ambiguous in purpose because they want you to ask those clarifying questions. Clarified questions are what ifs. What if my array is empty? What if my array is too big for memory? What if there's no answer? What if there are negatives? Stuff like that, depending on the constraints you set. Do you have any questions, Victor?
Okay, there's one question here. I would like to read it to you. It says, I understand that it's okay to delimit the task, but it's really okay make so many questions. Is it okay to ask many questions?
That's a good question. Okay. Yes, it's definitely okay to ask that many questions. Yes. So ask as many questions as you can. You will obviously not spend the whole 45 to 1 hour asking questions, but for 5 minutes you can ask a lot of questions regarding the problem. If you do not have something clear, like if you do not know something about the problem and you start coding, it's always going to be a red flag, since you started coding without knowing what they were asking in particular. There's some stuff you can skip. Usually you will ask about constraints about the input, so negatives, that whatever it's relevant to the problem. Maybe in our problem it wasn't relevant to ask for negatives, but in some problems it might be relevant. And maybe in our problem it wasn't relevant to ask for null pointers and stuff like that, but maybe not in another one it is. So yes, you'd want to ask a lot of questions. You will always want to clarify and state that not only you know what to do, because you may already know, but they want to see that you think about that you question it, because they don't want you to assume anything. So if you think that there's something ambiguous or something that could go wrong from the input, or like I said, what ifs, try to ask as many what ifs as you can. You can ask multiple ones, and that's always encouraged. Yes, but that's a great question. Okay, do we have another one, Victor?
No, not yet. So
okay, sounds good. If any more questions come up, just type them in the chat and we'll answer them. Okay, so we're about to finish this, but very quickly. some of the advantages of competitive programming, and these are some advantages that I've been able to apply myself. So the first one is the mastering of a programming language. Uh, Competitive programming is all about efficiency, and it shows you, or it teaches you to pay attention to all those details in the programming language you use. Most competitive programmers use C++, so you learn every quirk and every small thing, every small detail about how to optimize C++. So it's definitely an advantage to be a master at a programming language, since most interviews, not all, but most interviews are open to language. So basically you can do the programming interview in any language you want, usually with certain limits. You're not gonna use assembly to take an interview, but Java, Python, everything like C, C++, they're pretty much open to anything. So having a very strong knowledge on one, or very high proficiency in one programming language will definitely help you feel comfortable during the interview, and also let you focus on the solution. For example, I hear a lot of people that ask, hey, is it better to use the interview to do the interview in Python because we have more inbuilt stuff and we do not have to worry about typing a lot? And I would advise against that. I would advise you take the interview in whatever language you're most comfortable with. Because what happens if I'm very good at C++, but I decide, oh, I want to take Python because it's easier? Even if it's easier, I may not know everything about Python. I may not know the syntaxes about some very complicated stuff. So I will waste more time, and I may get stuff wrong because I do not know the language enough. So I would advise you to always take the interviews in the language you're most comfortable with, regardless of what language they use in the company, or what language is easier to program with. Just whatever you feel most comfortable with. Patterns. See, competitive programming is all about patterns. It's all about recognizing what you've already solved before, maybe with a twist. So competitive programming has helped me also be well at looking at things and noticing patterns. So you will see a problem and you will say, oh, that's an interesting way of solving it. And then you will see a similar problem and then you're like, oh, this sounds awfully similar as the orange problem, but this time it's apples or stuff like that. And it actually happened to me in my interviews, conversion interviews for my internship at Uber. Both of the questions that I solved or I was asked, I had already solved before, but they were always obviously a little bit slightly different and had a twist. But you start to realize the patterns, and you start to, oh, I can solve this, I can approach this via X method, Y method, Z method. So it's always a good way of practicing pattern detection. Always, obviously, being proficient at data structures, knowing what data structures to use, what's their time complexities, how to solve them, where are they most optimal in. Algorithms, the same thing. Complexity analysis. If you do not know what a complexity analysis means, or complexity means, it's basically the scale of how your program or your number of operations scale with your input. So basically, if you're talking about space complexity, well, how does the space scale given the increase of an input? And time complexity, how does the time scale given, or how does the time change given a greater input? So complexity analysis is very important to determine if your code is efficient. And if you understand complexity analysis, they will definitely care about that, because that shows that you know the pros and cons of your code. It shows that you know what the complexity, like how efficient your code is and why is it that efficient. So it's always a good thing to know. And debugging skills. In C++, like in competitive programming, time is everything. So you learn how to debug fast. You learn where to look. So it's always a good thing in the interviews to have very good debugging skills. And finally, we can start to pack things up by what do I enjoy the most about competitive programming. And I just wanted to give you an insight about what I enjoy about competitive programming and why I'm so passionate about it. aside from all the technical stuff that you can apply to your career as a software engineer, which is great, I personally enjoy two things. I enjoy competing, so competing was very fun. It's a lot of fun, especially when you have friends or colleagues and people who share the same passion with you, the same interest. It's very fun to compete. But also, my favorite thing about competitive programming is that you're able to learn how to think, and you learn how to learn as well. It's super interesting. Whenever you solve a question, you learn how to solve that question. But whenever you don't know how to solve that question, and you look up the answer, or you watch a video of someone answering it and explaining it, or you ask a colleague or you ask your friend, you do not only learn the solution, but you learn the way that they think. So you learn the way that they see the problem. You learn the way that they see the patterns. So it's like gaining a whole lot of knowledge about patterns and thinking. Or you say, "Oh, I hadn't thought about looking at this as an array," or "I didn't see that this problem could have been solved using a graph or a BFS or a DFS or any algorithm. I didn't know you could look at it that way." And that's very interesting because you learn how to look at things differently. And that's very valuable to whatever you decide to do, even if it's not competitive or even if it's not software engineering, even if you're not a programmer. Learning how to look at things a different way. There's actually a very good quote I read like I read when I was at visiting the NASA facilities in Texas, which said that you should look at what everyone looks, but think about what no one has thought before. So everyone sees the same things, but everyone thinks differently. So that's very very interesting. And finally, I have a QR code. It should work. Let me know if it doesn't. But I have a QR code to an article that I wrote regarding my experience with the Uber Career Prep program, and I talk a lot about not competitive programming. I talk a lot about skills that help me land the internship. I go into detail about resources, about questions, about tips, about what you can expect from the interviews. I also talk a little bit about the English language, and I also talk a little bit about the program, the career prep program itself. So if you want to read that, feel free. And thank you so much for coming with me this Saturday. And thank you, Victor, for having me today.
Well, thank you, Elias. Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. I have one question. I don't know if
Sure.
there are more questions here, but in the chat. But I have one question for you, Elias. When we talk about competitive programming, and when we talk about preparing for a tech interview, well, we're talking about investing time in our own preparation. So I would like to ask you, when you were training for competitive programming, how much time you invested in this?
That's a great question, Victor. So during my times of competing, I used to train when I was competing for the state level competition. So when I was kind of not too serious about it, or like not too serious, but rather I wasn't too into it as I was just discovering it. I was training like 3-4 days a week because we had classes 4 days a week for like 2 hours a day. But that was until I got into the national level competition, and that involved practicing pretty much every day, trying to be consistent for again 2 hours a day, pretty much. So that's what I was working with. But it definitely changes depending on what you're doing, right? So I've seen people practice for a lot more time or even less time, but that's what works for me. I enjoyed being consistent over spending a lot of hours and then burning out, which is something you should always watch out for.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for this information. I think it's going to be very useful for other undergraduates that are interested in preparing themselves for these tech interviews. I think there's one more question here in the chat. Let me see.
Sure.
Okay, this is a very good question. It says, Hector, he says, to be honest, I didn't knew competitive programming was even real. So, where do you recommend to start competing? Great question.
Yes, great question, and also very interesting because I didn't know either. I didn't know this was a thing. So, where did you start? That's a very good question, and I'm regretting I did not talk about this earlier. But there are a few good resources. I'm gonna link them in my presentation, and hopefully, maybe Victor, we can share that later.
Yes, of course.
So I will particularly link these two resources. Let me copy them. So basically, Omega Up, it's a platform that's designed by a Latin organization who is looking to promote competitive programming among Latin America. So they work closely. Omega Up is like a partner of the let me translate it. So they're a partner of the committee that organizes the Mexican Olympiad. So they're their partner. They for the competitions use Omega Up, and they have it's a platform where you can sign up, solve problems, take courses, and I think that's a great place to start to like focus on competitive programming. So basically, if you want to learn to solve problems like competitive programming, I want to look at what it is, you can definitely hop into Omega Up. And then the second resource I'm gonna link is lead code, and lead code is a little bit more advanced in the sense that lead code, I would say, has more complex problems like regarding data structures and algorithms, but it's also a great place to look at because they have a ton of problems sorted by category or like by data structure. So you can say, oh, I want to practice arrays. Here are a bunch of problems using arrays. Oh, I want to practice I don't know, I want to practice hash maps. Oh, here are a bunch of problems that use hash maps. So that's a very useful thing that LeetCode has that Omega Up doesn't. But Omega Up is a little bit more user friendly in the terms of it's in Spanish. There are courses to take, so they're very good. They're very good resources. And actually, I'll share one more that I really like. It's called Signal. Let me see if I can find the site. One more. So this one is a platform. It's a interview platform. So a lot of interviews take place in Code Signal. Uber uses Code Signal to take their interviews. So Code Signal it's like a mix of Omega Up and LeetCode because it has courses, but it's also sorted by category. So you can say, oh, I want to practice the introduction. I want to practice the basic. Code Signal will teach you how to do that. It's a very good resource as well. I'm bummed I didn't mention this earlier, but very good question. Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, and regarding this question, I would like to add that if you are a student here at the University of Yucatan, we have our brand new community on competitive programming. And if you are not here at the University of Yucatan, you can contact me, and I can find where in your city or your state have a similar community, maybe in a university, and that are involved in these competitions. And there's one last question: which languages are the most used in competitive programming?
Sure, good question. I would say that most people use C++. Like that's 99% of competitive programmers at the top level use C++. Mainly because of the speed. So C++ is a very fast language, and that's the reason that's being used. For example, Python, it's not a good program to use, programming language to use, since it's very slow. And you're measured, as far as I know, most competitions like have the same bar for everyone, regardless of the problem, regardless of the language. So even if you use Python, you will be like compared with C++ people, and that's an impossible thing for Python to do. It's it's a lot slower than C++, and that's the reason. So there might be like a few other languages. I'm not sure if like Java is used. Java is sometimes used as well, but C++ 99% of the time.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your presentation, Elias. Thank you very much for the questions. And this session has been or is being recorded now, and I will upload it to our YouTube channel. Thank you, guys, and see you later.